myth in a sense is something that is true in pattern, but not necessarily true in detail.
Right.
And I think that's part of the confusion that we've come across, where we're looking at these old myths from our reductionist standpoint and saying, well, this person didn't live at that time. This never happened.
Mm.
This is not true. But our definition of truth is limited if that's what we're using to find out true, because there's something very true within the pattern of the myth that's
Mm.
trying to touch us underneath our propositions, touch us in a way that makes sense underneath whether or not this literally happened. It's not only that it literally happened once, is that something about this continues to happen in our lives now. So
Mm.
myth, in a sense, is these true in pattern bits of wisdom that are being pushed forward intergenerationally throughout time.
Welcome to the Heart of Man podcast, a podcast for any man seeking to live in alignment with his deepest core and lead a life of profound meaning and connection. I'm your host, Alex Lehman, and I'm here to empower you through transformative conversations, eye-opening insights, and practical wisdom. Join me now as we venture into the heart of man. Let's dive in. Now, in this episode, I had the privilege of diving into the fascinating world of one of the most inspiring humans I've met on my 2.5-year adventure here in Bali, Carlos Tao. Carlos is a yoga teacher, a philosopher, and a visionary in the fields of anatomy, functional movement, and kinesthetic intelligence. He's also the founder of the fluidUs Academy, a movement that is dedicated towards offering methods and transformative practices to support others in returning back to the wonder of life. I was first introduced to Carlos when I attended one of his classes at a local yoga studio here in Bali. What I expected to be an ordinary yoga class turned into an extraordinary experience. Carlos beautifully integrated human development, myth, and philosophy into his teachings, introducing all kinds of new movements and language. I came out of that class feeling a deeper sense of connection to myself, and as though I had tapped into a more expansive expression of who I am. Now, this conversation with him was truly one of a kind. Whilst we go little into Carlos' own personal story, we dive into a vast exploration of our modern culture, its loss of meaning and connection, and how we can reclaim it so we can access a deeper state of fulfillment. I've seen Carlos bring a deep commitment to his work in order to help others connect back to that state of awe and wonder, rekindling the magic of life again. Having gone through various of his trainings myself, I've been consistently blown away by his ability to bridge myth, story, anatomy, and functional movement. And what I've found is that it is through this integration that he empowers individuals to move past their own limited views of themselves so they can tap into a deeper expression of who they are. I have no doubt that this will be an eye-opening, inspirational, and thought-provoking conversation for all of you. Without any further ado, let's dive into the show with Carlos Tao. Carlos Tao, welcome to the Heart of Man podcast.
Thank
How
you.
are you feeling today?
Excited and always a little nervous. There's, for lack of a better word, some kind of sacred thing that happens that something in me starts to tremble. I think that's
Thank you
about
for your openness. Yeah, to some degree, I noticed that nervousness as well present for myself. Most likely because I was very much looking forward to this conversation with you in many ways. I've met you a few times. I as well went through your fluidUs Deeper Body workshop and just found so much incredible value in what you have to offer. And I would just like to preface for our listeners the first time I met you, if you're open to that, which was at a yoga class at the local Radiantly Alive studio in Canggu. And I believe the idea was to just bring more awareness to an upcoming yoga teacher training that you were about to do. And I came to the class having had already a number of years of experience in yoga. And then I came to your class and I noticed all kinds of new movements, all kinds of new language. I noticed you incorporating human development into the movements that you were bringing in. And you were as well bringing myth and story into what you were doing. And it was such a unique, refreshing way of bringing this work out, and I came out of that class really feeling a sense of awe, a sense of wonder. And I know that is something that you really speak a lot about. And this is how I want to preface the beginning of our conversation. From conversations that I've heard you speak about in person, but then as well podcasts I've listened of you, you're a lot about transitioning people from the ordinary world to the through the door into magic, through the door into wonder. And I would love to hear, what does that mean for you? Where did that fascination for magic and wonder come from? And perhaps you can just guide us on a road through your own personal journey of how you got to where you are today.
I forget that that's where we met. To me, it like our relationship in a sense fleshed out more in the deeper body when we had some time. And I remember looking forward to your questions whenever you would raise your hand. And I don't know if you thought you were. I remember you apologizing a couple times when you asked a question as if it was somehow going to offend, or you were pushing back on some of the things that I said. And on the contrary, I thought that was gorgeous, and that's what we need more of. It's in a sense the work as I see it that I'm doing is teaching people, myself included, in a sense, recovering our ability to sense and to feel and to speak from a certain place, and again, how to work together, work with other beings towards a space between us that's more pregnant than either of our minds can do by themselves. So whenever I see someone that starts to push back, it's an exciting thing, because that means that it's going to stir me in a way that I hadn't been stirred before. I mean, if the question
Right.
comes from the right place, it's going to push me to reconceptualize, to feel from a different way. It allows me to, in a sense, step ecstatically, meaning ecstasis in the real sense of the word, which means to stand beside yourself. So it allows me to kind of transcend my previous thinking. And it's one of the problems that we have when we're, and I've done this for so many years, where it was just me and study, and me in a dark room with like Kierkegaard, and and Ramana, and Siddhartha, and Hermann Hesse, and all of these things, and we're just kind of in this locked room, but there was a limit to how far that can go. So
Right.
in a sense, selfishly, to bring others into this conversation, to expand and broaden our concept of what it means to have a self, to be a self. So that's to me what I recall from our first interactions. I'd be like, yeah, like that's a good question, man. Like I'm gonna need a second with that one. But there's something that's required for that type of self transcendence, and even self transcendence is an interesting concept, because how do we transcend ourself if myself is the one that's doing the transcending? So we get
Exactly.
into this kind of bind where, if it's just me from this place, from this personality, from this perspective, trying to self transcend, chances are that all I'm doing is I'm filtering information and reorganizing it through the same self. So there really is no vertical transcendence. It's just in this horizontal state where we're just getting, quote unquote, better in quantity, but not really shifting anything aspectually or ontologically, vertically in quality. So that's an interesting thing. So there's something, in a sense, that we need to surrender to, and there's different ways that we can talk about this. But this surrendering, in order for this surrendering to be something that we take on as beneficial, as something that will allow, because there is that sense of there's a questioning by universe, by life, an invitation in where we get to either answer the call. If you want to like frame this in the hero's journey, we can either answer the call or we can deny the call. And it's not so easy to just say, well, just answer the call, just surrender to this. Like, why would I surrender to this?
Exactly.
And wonder and awe, wonder in the face of something that we can't grasp propositionally only, something that affects us almost instinctually
Mm.
at a level beneath the propositional, at a level beneath our current ideas, at a level beneath what we understand as far as what is happening to me. That's what we need, and that's to me the beginning of something, the beginning of the possibility of a transcendence beyond the current framing. And speaking about wonder and awe, these things are in a sense instinctual in us. Like when we're faced with something that drops us to our knees in wonder and awe, that's something that at the same time can make us feel very small compared to our own ideas of what the world was. It challenges us in some way. And it can also make us feel connected to something beyond ourselves. So in a sense, it moves us in two directions, like we're grounded and humbled, and at the same time, we're connected to something bigger. We feel bigger than we were in some sense. So again, now we're moving from the horizontal somehow into the vertical, which allows at least a glitch for a moment or a crack in the current framing. We get
Mm.
inspired possibly to go further past our current framing. So when I speak about wonder and awe, these are places, if you want to go and frame this in like Platonism, the good, the true, and the beautiful. These
Mm.
these are the things that something in us aspires to something in us is drawn towards it even before we can conceptualize what that is. So putting us in touch with our capacity to be in wonder and awe, to me, is the beginning.
Yeah.
Is the beginning. It's the why. It's
Mm.
the first why of why we should go further than this.
Mm.
It's faced with something that's beyond ourselves.
Mm.
So I know I said a lot there, but hopefully that gives you an idea of why um, wonder and awe as a necessary first step
Yeah.
into into
Mm.
these possibilities of a self
Yeah.
transcendence, of a reenchantment of the world,
Yeah.
of a revisioning of ourselves, of in a sense a return to a mythic home. I
Mm.
talk a lot about um, domicide,
Mm.
which
What is that? If you could just elaborate on that.
Domicide comes, it's kind of jamming of two words together. We're almost hyphenating two words. It's domicile in the sense of home, and
Mm-hmm.
side as from homicide. So it's a sense of a death of our mythic center, a death of our
Mm.
home. It's we've lost our place in existence, in a sense, where
Hmm.
we've overglorified a certain aspect of our intellect, which is great and necessary and beautiful and powerful, and um, it's an incredible tool that's moved us forward in so many ways, but we've disconnected or cut ourselves off from another aspect of ourselves. We've never been so comfortable. We've never had so many resources. We've never had so much time. We've never had so much information at our disposal. And in a general sense, we've never been so disconnected. We've never felt so misplaced. We've never had the epidemic of things such as depression and lack of identity and lack of meaning that we're facing right now. So something else is going on outside of um, our subjective sense of well-being, which is never, it should never have been higher than this. But somehow our meaning has gone down as our subjective sense of well-being has gone up.
Right.
So something has been missed
Hmm.
somewhere. So to connect us back into that place, to draw something forward from who we've been in a way that's satisfying to the intellect, in a way
Hmm.
that we don't have to turn off um, our capacity to think rationally,
Hmm.
but can we draw forward some kind of depth outside of the abstract,
Hmm.
outside of ideas, and into what John Vervaeke would call the perspectival and the participatory forms of learning, which is what things like ritual used to have for us, where it's you can't quite put your finger on why when I did this ritual did I feel a certain way? We try to justify that afterwards, but something is happening to us underneath our linear thinking that's transforming us in some way, that's settling us, that's giving us our capacity to move forward in the world in a way that makes sense from a center that we've lost.
Mm.
So what we're trying to do with this is bring those back.
Yeah. Thank you, Carlos.
Sure.
There's a lot that's already been said. If I were just to reflect back to what you said, and of course not to the entire extent, but to a certain degree, it seems like the first piece that I'm really noticing is a lot around that we have lost our sense of self. We have lost a sense of value towards the story of, towards why myth may be important in the world, towards, and we have favored comfort, favored well-being over having a deeper sense of connection with ourselves. It seems like there are certain aspects of ourselves that we have let go in the process. This is something I really want to get into with you. But before we hop into that, I would just really like to preface by, first of all, maybe you can just elaborate on your own journey. Maybe you can preface the audience around how did you get into the work that you do, and how did you come to a lot of the discoveries that you're making and speaking of in this interview?
The issue that, well, first I find my story less interesting
Mm.
in a sense than some of the other things, and I'll say this first to give myself a way out, that a lot of what I'm going to say has been colored by the experiences that have come later, if that makes sense.
Yep.
It was a much more meandering journey and a lot more kind of dead ends and being lost for a while. But to give a summary of that, because we could spend the next couple of hours just speaking about that.
Sure.
There's a bit of grace that's involved here, and I'll use the word grace for lack of a better word. I part of me would love to say that it's because I'm so smart or because I put in the work, but there's something in us that desire, and what interests us is, in a sense, something divine, because you can't choose what you'll desire. In a sense, you can't choose what your interests are going to be. So there's almost this aspirational self inside of us that's pulling us towards it, that we don't understand. But our desires and our interests, in a sense, if they're well placed and well contextualized, tend to be a path towards this aspirational transcendent self that's calling us forward. So my interests, for some reason, were in I mean, I think as kids we're all in the realm of fantasy and magic, and I think we all have this sense of there's something weirder going on,
Right.
and nobody older than a certain age seems to either know it or they don't act like it. And as kids we have this gift of everything being new. So everything has this flavor of newness and weirdness and mystery to it. And in a sense, I think Terence McKenna spoke about it with this idea that, when we're young, we're 2 years old or a year, everything, we have our eyes wide open and everything is magical and fantastic. And, there's this process happening in front of us. There's an open window and this fluffy ball of hair with two eyes, and it's making weird sounds, and it's moving in ways that aren't controlled by me, and I'm fascinated, and there's this whole mysterious world that's happening. And then mom or dad come in and say cat, and that shrinks the mysterious into the propositional in that sense. And it's like
into that one word,
into that box, and it leaves so much outside of it, and that one thing, that experience that we're able to savor, becomes this abstract idea that we can put on the shelf. And the next experience that happens like that, chances are we won't be available for the full experience. We'll just bring in the symbol of cat. And I've seen cat. I've seen many cats, so this is nothing new to me. It becomes a foregone conclusion.
Yeah.
Most of our world becomes a foregone
Yeah.
conclusion.
If I were to just jump in on that for a
Sure.
moment, it what I notice is that, as something, if I notice myself repeating something, or if there is a certain repetition that is present, usually my mind remembers it and stores it as this is the way it always is, right?
Mm.
So, for example, if I see this tree, then I have this understanding that this is always the same tree, right? Um, but to really bring that curiosity, as you say, that each moment is new, each experience is new, and really to invite as well that openness to that experience, and at the same time, that's, I guess, is as much as it creates a sense of ease towards living life by reducing something to a symbol, it does take away from that sense of wonder and awe.
Absolutely. There's something beautiful even in the way that you said that, and I always speak from two worlds. I'm I'm I'm, I'm conscious of the tension, and I say tension. Tension's gotten a bad rap within our current language. So there's a Greek word tonus,
Mm.
and tonus is tension, but without the negative aspects of the word, in a sense. The way that if you had a violin, there has to be a certain tonus in the strings, or there's no music. So that that tonus between the rational and the symbolic, the reduced world, which is necessary in order, because the world is combinatorially explosive.
Yeah.
There's too many things. There's
Yeah.
too many things going on. There's too many things to pay attention to. If I was, in Martin Buber's words, to I thou, instead of I it,
Mm.
I it is this relationship of control. I thou is this reverential. I don't know this moment. I need to understand. I need to embody the experience of being with this. If we were to do that with everything, it would bring us to a standstill. We wouldn't be able to do the things that we need to survive as beings. If I was, every time we see a leaf, it's like, wow, we would be just wrapped in awe all the time. So, but again, but if we're only in that symbolic world, then the richness of existence itself is stolen from us and we feel lost. So there's this tonus between these two things. And Ian McGilchrist, um, a neuroscientist and writer, he's done a lot of work on the left brain, right brain aspects of this, where the right brain is wide open, everything all at once, and the left brain is the reducer. It's the symbolic brain, and he's done a lot of really cool work with this, and studying people that have had strokes and what this means. I don't want to go too into that, but that sense of being able to balance both halves of ourselves, the fullness, the gestalt, in a sense, of the right brain, of the wonder of everything, and then the reducing quality of the left brain to be able to reduce things to their symbols. But again, that tonus of being able to come in and out of both of these worlds. So it's not one or the other. It's how do we place ourselves, how do we bind ourselves appropriately to be able to feel and understand ourselves from both of these places.
And cultivating as well this ability to switch between one and the other, without having one overexpressed and then having one underexpressed.
Absolutely, and having and I'd say I'll play off a little bit of what you said of having arenas, specific arenas, and I would offer that that's what ritual used to do for us. That's what myth, intergenerational wisdom being pushed forward through time underneath the propositional. Not so easy to explain literally within a couple of sentences what's going on, because again, what we are is combinatorially explosive. So to be able, there's the old, I might have said it in the experience that we had together, um, this old poem is, you know, how does the wildflower grow? Not even the god of spring knows. And it's not that the god of spring doesn't know. The god of spring can't know propositionally, because it's impossible to show. I mean, where do you start? Where do you end? The wildflower grows, like, the answer is in the participatory experience of the wildflower growing. Because if you go back far enough, it includes the soil underneath it, the evolution of plant life in general, the evolution of the universe. So to answer that question, eventually, if you go back far enough, it's everything. There's this combinatorially explosive aspect to it. So it's being able to have arenas and a reverence for both halves of ourselves. And what's happened, I think, is within the reductionist scientific model, we've lost some of that. We've again overglorified. There's a tyranny of the reductionist. There's a tyranny of the abstract. We've lost what you're talking about, which is that ability to not only be able to move between the two worlds, but to have a respectability to the ritual and the myth and the wisdom that's come down underneath everything that we've thrown words on top of.
So let's speak about the value of myth and the value of ritual. You've mentioned that a few times. Perhaps we can just preface by answering the question, what is myth? And why is that valuable?
Beautiful. And that's not as easy of a question to answer, in a sense. I've heard a few things about this. So myth, I think I just hinted at that. Myth, in a sense, is something that is true in pattern, but not necessarily true in detail.
Right.
And I think that's part of the confusion that we've come across, where we're looking at these old myths from our reductionist standpoint and saying, well, this person didn't live at that time. This never happened. This is not true. But our definition of truth is limited if that's what we're using to find out true, because there's something very true within the pattern of the myth that's trying to touch us underneath our propositions, touch us in a way that makes sense underneath whether or not this literally happened. It's not only that it literally happened once, is that something about this continues to happen in our lives now. So myth, in a sense, is these true in pattern bits of wisdom that are being pushed forward intergenerationally throughout time. And if we pay attention and we understand myth, we realize that the myth didn't happen then. The myth is happening now.
Right.
We are currently living out these patterns. We're trying to understand beneath our ideas, what is it to be human? What is it to face life, in a sense? And that in a sense is what myth is.
Thank you. Yeah, hearing you, it seems like myths and stories are there to actually teach us about life. And as you say, we can't take it word for word, fact for fact, that this is exactly what happened, but rather we need to extract the patterns that those stories perhaps want to say, that want to be expressed. And, in my own journey, I've definitely found the value of myth. I initially explored the work of Joseph Campbell, who extracted the hero's journey. But then specifically, I as well looked into a lot of mythopoetic work around the topic of masculinity. I explored Robert Bly, who wrote Iron John. I explored Robert Moore, who wrote the book King, Warrior, Magician, Lover, and they looked at these old stories, right? They looked at poetry and then explored certain themes and extracted, well, how is this relevant as well in our own lives at this point of time?
Beautiful. Absolutely. There's something this is great for the conversation. And I promise at some point, if we don't do it this time, we'll come back and do it another one, and I'll let you know my whole journey,
sure.
and we'll come back to the biographical.
All good.
Or I'll attempt to bring in pieces of it as we move along. And this is what I'm about to say now. And again, it's not as if I know what's going to come out of my mouth, but again, we spoke a little bit before we came on that something's going to happen in the space between us, and that's really the richness of this. I know what my own ideas are in some sense, but when we come in here, it's now you're seeing me kind of wrestle with
we're
something.
dancing with each other.
Dancing, beautifully said. So you spoke about extracting the patterns from the myths, and I'll preface John, or I'll mention John Vervaeke again, because especially when it comes to the kind of language and some of the influence that he's had on my ability to speak in this way. I mean, his work has been fascinating. He's a cognitive scientist, a great mind. Um, but he talks about four types of knowing. The first one is the propositional. The second one is the procedural. Then it's the perspectival, and then it's the participatory. And all of these are necessary. It's not like one is not necessary. But that propositional is at the realm of ideas. It's at the realm of concepts, and the procedural is in the realm of, well, how do I do this? The procedure of something, and then the perspectival is being able to put myself within the perspective of something, and then the participatory is I'm actually involved completely, where I am changing the world, participating from this, and the world is changing me. So I'm in it from within that way. And this level of myth, or this ability to drop into these worlds, especially with the ways that we've grown up and the ways that we've learned to think and to answer, we tend to again glorify the proposition. We tend and stop in a sense at the proposition. A lot of philosophy has turned into sets of propositions that, are they well organized? Are they well reasoned? Is there a logical continuation of this, where it's been philosophy as an academia, as an academic pursuit, instead of philosophy as a way of life, of something transformational. So when we're talking about myth, the propositional extraction, Joseph Campbell in his hero's journey, where he went through all of these different myths and attempted to pull out a through line of all of them that were similar, and we pull this out and we look at them and we understand them. That's a level. That's one level from within the myth. But then the other part underneath is to go into the procedural. Well, how do I do this for myself? How do I put on this perspective? How do I open the possibility of participating in the myth now? Like, what's the bridge from, okay, logically I see the myth, I understand, I can pull out the stories, but something else is going on when we read myth, and we allow ourselves, or we put ourselves in an appropriate state of receptivity, and we'll notice that our minds, or our thinking, it's like we understand what the words mean, but something is being felt inside of us that almost is a level beyond what the words mean. We can't put the finger on, well, I feel like this because the proposition from within the myth is saying this, and it makes me feel like this. It's working on these two different levels, which is also some of these myths that have been around for thousands of years. There's a reason they've been around for thousands of years. Like, look how easy it is to just lose something from one generation to the other.
Yep.
So if something's been around for 5,000 years as a story, there is something profound in there that's important enough for us at the beginning to take through time just orally over and over, and then to make sure it's not lost. So ritual and myth together somehow, to have these things be not just in the propositional, to pull them out, to flesh them out, but to embody them in a way, to make the worlds of myth and ritual not only intellectually respectable again, but intellectually responsible. Meaning that there's something in us that is going to grow in wisdom. And wisdom is different than just knowledge in a sense. Knowledge, information is fine, but in a sense, wisdom is something different. How do I use this information? How do I know which virtue to prioritize within this moment?
Seems like it is applied knowledge, if I can just interject.
Applied knowledge. I'd say that's one aspect of it.
Okay.
I'd say that's one aspect of it. I think wisdom, even the definition of wisdom, is something that we're still moving with and trying to understand. Even like the Socratic idea of like the ultimate wisdom consists in knowing that you know nothing. I mean, well, damn. But it's almost like you have to know so much, and that seems like such a, I don't know, he was, to know that you know nothing, but it's almost like you have to know so much to get to the edges of your knowing and look off the cliff of what you can't know anymore, to come not just to the proposition of, well, I know that I know nothing, but to have that be embodied. It's like I've been to the edge. I've realized the limitations of my propositional understanding, that I will never be able to go beyond this and know everything propositionally. Like my intellect is going to be limited in a very real way here. That's a wisdom outside of a proposition. So wisdom again has this other sense to it. And we, the same things that make us so adaptable as human beings are also the same capacities that make us um, fertile for self-deception. So in a sense, I'd say wisdom is also movement further away from self-deception towards um, a relationship with something that brings us meaning and closer to the really real. Because humans have, in a sense, two drives. First, to feel some kind of contentment, some kind of meaning, but also the other drive to make sure that's what's making us feel content and meaningful is also real. And I think that that's why things that are just trying to fill in the holes that have been left by myth and religion, and that are just superficial and nice ideas, they're not doing the job right now, because there's something in us that doesn't quote unquote believe, that we're having to work towards belief of these things, but it's not something in us that's within the participatory and the perspectival, like feeling something different, as this connection to the really real. And I'd say that wisdom in a sense is a movement away from self-deception and towards the really real. But again, and I don't think we ever get there. It's in a sense, it's a horizon. There's a sense of, there's the having needs and the being needs, where, and again, they're both necessary. The having needs is, I need to have water. I need to have water, and I need to have food. I need to have some sort of human contact. Like these are, I need to have these things, and there's a limit to them.
Yeah.
Like I'm thirsty. I need to have water. Okay, well, I'll drink water. And there's a certain point where drinking any more water would be irrational, because I'm no longer thirsty. I've filled myself up. I don't need water anymore. The being needs it. You don't get to the end of them. They're basically infinite. Like you're not going to get to the point where it's like, well, I'm wise enough. I've reached my limit. To be any more wise would be irrational. So in a sense, there's a horizon of wisdom. There's a horizon of wonder, and the horizon has this sense of being out there. We never reach the horizon. Like you never like walk in a straight line. It's like, finally I got the horizon, because as soon as you get there, the horizon has moved off. So we can move in the direction of wisdom, in a sense.
Thank you for that. I feel called to ask you, how, if we don't ever get there, how do we at least embark on that journey? And as I ask you that, I'm wondering how perhaps a ritual may be the path to go on. And I want to preface that it was truly when I got to Bali a bit over 2 years ago, that's when I really started connecting to this idea of ritual. I would get into these breathwork circles where we would meet in circle, where we would be able to witness each other in our shares. We would go through some form of experience together, and we would be openly sharing our experiences. And it was in the sharing that I would often notice, oh, this person is going through something very similar that I am going through. And at the same time, when I was able to share something that I was going through, I would be able to be witnessed. And it seemed like I felt more connected to myself, but then as well to others. So I'm wondering, like, first of all, how do we embark on that journey? And is ritual maybe the solution to that?
I think so. Well, let's say it's one of the things, and I think what we need is, and it's difficult. It's difficult. The reason I'm struggling here, because there's going to be a fair amount of, in a sense, a convincing that needs to happen. And again, going back to the wonder and awe and why that's so important, of why to do this. Because if it wouldn't have been the experience that you had, and it's just putting on the trappings of the ritual without the experience, without that sense of wonder and awe, and it came for you in that sense with the sense of connection to self and to others, and something different, something felt like it shifted, like the world looked different.
Yeah.
Like nothing was done out there, but within
That's it.
that container that was created, something was shifted. And ritual has, I'd say, one of its functions is, and again, we're struggling with words. It's not as if we had the definition of what ritual is and then we put the word on this thing that's happening. It's on the contrary. These things were happening. And then we were left like, well, what is it that's happening within these circles? Because this goes almost back as far as language does,
Yep.
in tribes, nomadic tribes that would have these quote unquote rituals. They didn't call them rituals, they called it life. You'd sit around the fire, and the hunt was the next day, and you joined together, and then you come back and there was a celebration. But they started to realize that there was something powerful that was happening. And ritual, in a sense, one of the things that rituals can do is help us move into an appropriate state of reception, in a sense. Um, we all look through, we all have lenses on, and we all look through our lenses. And we spend a lot of time looking through our lenses without realizing that everything that we're looking at is already colored with whatever lenses we're wearing. So
Can you elaborate on that?
Sure.
Just what is, like, for someone who may not understand what it is that you're saying, what do you mean that when you say we are looking through lenses?
Sure. We all have a perspective, and that perspective is colored from our upbringing, from our experiences, from our ideologies, from our belief systems, from family, from all of these different things. We have assumptions about the world around us and how it looks and how it works. And it's one of these things that's difficult because we will never be able to completely step outside of that. So I use the joke sometimes of, someone born in the West that's an atheist is never going to truly be an atheist. They're a Christian atheist, or a Jewish atheist, or a Muslim atheist. And the reason that I say that is because there's so many assumptions written into the ways that we see the world that even our denial of a certain part of our cultural aspect is already colored from within that cultural aspect. I will never be able to be someone that wasn't brought up in my family.
Yep.
No matter how, that's something that I will never transcend. So in a sense, that's like the finitude aspect of it. And then there's a transcendent quality to me also, be able to transcend, but there's also limitations to me. So again, that tonus, that tension in two directions. So when I say that we're looking through certain lenses, there's certain stereotypes that I'm looking at the world through, assumptions that I make around the world. So if I'm wearing glasses with pink lenses, someone can talk to me about blue, and I could squint and try to turn my head and turn it around and look backwards and read about blue and understand the concept of blue. But when I look, I'm not really going to be able to see blue outside of the lenses that I'm wearing. But most of us don't look at the lenses ever. We assume that the world that we're looking at out there is the world as it is, outside of my lenses. So one of the things that we can do is not only look through the lenses, but look at the lenses. And the ability to look at the lenses gives us the possible capacity to transcend our lenses, to be inspired beyond our current framing. And that's, again, that's taking the horizontal and just looking through the lenses, looking through the lenses, looking through the lenses, some kind of experience, a breathwork experience, a psychedelic experience, a ritualistic experience, that for that one moment, the way that I see the world is challenged, and I get to take this leap above my current framing and be able to see something different. So that's when I say lenses.
Yeah, so, and I feel like you already touched on it, but hearing you, the question that arises is, how do we begin to embark on this journey of looking at the lenses? You spoke about breathwork journeys, you spoke about ritualistic ceremonies, psychedelic experiences, but perhaps, like maybe we can contextualize it in a way of what is needed in order for us to really embark on a journey of looking at the lenses.
Beautiful. Welcome to my life's work. That's that you saw me just kind of nodding, because I mean that is my, in a sense, hopefully in a good sense, that is my obsession of how to do this. And one of the things that religions had that was so valuable was an ecology of practices. It wasn't just ideas to take on. Like we've limited religion to the propositional, and I would offer that the powerful thing that was going on in religions was beyond the propositional. And we kind of, again, the same way that we do with myth. Well, this stuff didn't happen. Here's problematics. Here's how this human failed within this religion. Here's how that one failed within that religion. This is unnecessary for us. We missed the mark somehow of something that was available to us below the propositions, within the myth, within the ritual, within the community, within these bigger dialogues, with grappling with what humanity and existence is. What would it mean to have something be divine? What does it mean to live between the finitude of existence, but also have some kind of consciousness in me that can contemplate the infinite? And we're constantly pulled between these two poles, like halfway between animal and angel. Like, oh my God, like what is this? This is what we struggle with every day. And we had an ecology of practices where it's not as if we would decide on a day-to-day basis, well, do I want to be part of this religion? Do I do my rituals today? It wasn't. It's like you did them regardless of how you felt. And something in us was shifted constantly. There was a relationship between these two poles that made sense to a deep aspect of ourselves. And that's in the Nietzschean sense of, God is dead. When we threw out religion, and it wasn't so much. I think partly he was a big critic of Christianity, so partly it was good, but there was this other part of like, what have we done? The blood of what's coming next is going to be on in our hands. There's these attempts to try to fill that gap with utopian societies, like Nazism and like communist regimes, and like it started. He was almost a prophet in that sense of, we're going to need to find what we've killed somewhere. So part of the work that we're doing is to see what we can draw forward. Not completely in a nostalgic way. I'm not saying that we can just bring everything back exactly the way it was from religion, but I do believe that we can draw the wisdom forward, that we can go back in, to the traditions that birthed us, in a sense, and see what they were really struggling with, what they were really grappling with, and can we stand on the shoulders of the wise ones of old and see what we can move forward with it. So creating, and we can tell, right? We can tell that there's like, why the hell would you have come to Bali and done breath work? Why do people take on yoga? I mean, healthy body, like these are justifications we put. Like there's plenty of stuff to make us healthy. There's some longing in us for something transcendent, and we're trying to fill in the gaps wherever we can do it. So the hunger for that is there. That has not gone away from us. But the ecology of practices that we used to have isn't. So a revivifying of an ecology of practices, and I don't think that there's just one way necessarily to take this on, but some ideas that we need to take on, that it can't be just one practice, because we're so prone to self-deception. If psychedelics is your only practice, that leads really easily to inflation. Psychedelics have this powerful potential in them to shift the lenses, to show us really quickly that the way that we were seeing the world was incomplete. So, wow, I realized the lenses that I was looking for weren't complete. But then we can all come out of the psychedelic experience with different propositional claims based on our individual. So it's like, wow, we all had this huge experience, and then we come back, and then really quickly we go back into our propositions, and we try to frame it within our previous understanding. So it's different practices coming in to affect different areas. You talked about a few of them. Dialogue and community is one of those places, because let's say psychedelics is one of the practices that someone would do. Well, then you have to bring your experience back into community with the commitment not just to defend our propositions, but that we all, in a sense, in a sacred way, like you and I are doing here, it's we're hoping that between the two of us, we're both enriched. We're both allowed to transcend our previous ideas of something. And dialogos starts to happen in the ancient Greek sense, where between us, something starts to take shape that was more than either of us. And it's almost like now we're on a ride. It's like you're saying something. You started out asking me about, my journey, and then all of a sudden we're here talking about, ecology of practices. Something has taken over. So that commitment to moving towards the horizon of wisdom together and away from self-deception within a community of trust. That's one of the things that would need to be part of, in some way, of an ecology of practice. Some kind of ritualistic um, experience. You talked about breath work. We do breath work also within fluidUs, along with movement practices that again afford us a different perspective of who we are and what we are. Jung's line, I use it a lot, where it's useless to preach the light if no one can see it. It's much more needful to teach the art of seeing. So again, teaching people how to feel, how to sense themselves, how to challenge their perspective, how to challenge their own lenses, um, how to open themselves up to these deeper conversations. And it's how to create this and make it inspiring. Part of the making it inspiring, part of this making this palpable, is showing someone that they can feel in a direct experience the magic that we're talking about out there, like the infinite aspect of themselves, can be not just understood conceptually and propositionally, but we can put them into an experience that they have the potential of confronting that ground of being within themselves. And that it's why it's so important. I rarely start talking about philosophy right away in the classes. It's almost like this comes first, where people have these experiences, they feel something within themselves, they're challenging the idea of themselves as a monological self, as one thing, and moving that towards a dialogical self, where we're different voices from within, different languages that are happening inside of us, different archetypes, in a sense, different beings, like we're a tribe inside that we can have a relationship with, and putting them within that sense where the previous version of themselves that they had can't hold the experience that they just had. So in that moment of awe, of wonder, of what was that? What was that? My world for a second is I can't go back to the world the same as it was before. My old concepts can't hold this new experience. And in a sense, that's what a mystical experience is, a transformative experience. In a regular experience, let's say you wake up, let's say you went out partying last night with a bunch of friends, and you know you woke up at 12 o'clock in the afternoon, you guys got home late, you wake up at 12 o'clock in the afternoon, you open your eyes, the sun hasn't risen. You check the time, you look outside, you open your windows, the sun hasn't risen. You freak out, oh my god, you hide yourself under the covers, you fall asleep again. You wake up again at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. You look outside, the sun is out. You start calling your friends and you're like, hey, my God, what happened? This is crazy. I woke up at noon and there was no sun. The sun didn't rise. And all your friends start to tell you, yeah, we were up and we were awake. The sun was fine. So you'll take that experience and be like, well, either I was dreaming or I was still kind of messed up from the night before, or something happened. You'll shift your understanding of the experience that you had in order to match the reality that you already had previously.
Yeah.
That's a regular experience. It's what we do in regular experiences. Mystical experience, transformational experience, transcendental experiences do the opposite, which is interesting. We will change the external reality and our ideas about the world outside of ourselves to match the experience. Psychedelics, or a breathwork journey, or some kind of deep experience that we had that challenges our worldview and the way we saw ourselves and the world around us, the way that we were living, so much so that we'll come out of those experiences and we won't change our narrative of the experience. We'll actually start to change the way that we live. We'll change the way that we see the world based on the one experience that flew in the face of the way that I saw the world before. So the capacity for these kinds of experiences, to put ourselves in rituals that prepare us, that open ourselves up to an ability to sense something outside of our normal framing, to allow a little bit of light to shine through to a transcendent possibility of moving beyond the world as I knew it before. That to me, it's not sitting down with people. I think that's the problem with philosophy. Sit down with someone and we just start to talk about ideas, and it's just ideas. I'm just trying to defend my worldview, you're defending yours, I'm going to double down on mine. But this isn't what we're talking about. We're talking about facing something that's beyond the propositional content and then coming together afterwards to rework the way that we saw ourselves again, to move ourselves hopefully further and further away from self-deception, closer and closer to the really real.
Yeah. You mentioned the words coming together, and I'm curious to hear, and I have never heard you speak about this before, but I feel called to ask you about the value of relationship, the value of coming together in this way, the value of community, and how community, relationship, to participate, to engage in life, how that can as well be used to have those transcendental, to have those transformational experiences. I'm curious if there's anything that arises for you.
It's not the easiest part for me, and it's never been the easiest part for me. I was much more comfortable, again, with with dead guys and dead women, in a closed room and grappling with these things on my own. It's essential.
Mm.
It's essential. It's essential to have that kind of community, to have these dialogues. But we've forgotten how to speak to each other. We don't know how to come together in this way anymore, at least in a general way. And 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 I appreciate, and I start to see now that there are attempts to bring this back. I think the attempts to bring this back are still somewhat problematic, but we've come to a way of quote unquote communicating where again it's the defense of an identity.
Yep.
When we come together, it's like I'm going to defend my propositions, and I'm going to debate you, and I'm not really looking to see what I can learn from you. Like, how can this conversation make me wiser? How can you show me somehow something that I was missing that it wouldn't have been possible for me to discover on my own? I think that's essential. One of the things that we're doing and we're taking on more now is a humble attempt. It's not humble. It's not humble because it's something large. How to bring back this capacity, how to teach people how to speak to each other again. And I prefaced that a little bit earlier where, that we have some kind of sacred commitment that what's going to happen between us, that we're both committing to something that's beyond my propositions or your propositions. That what we're doing in a sense is it's almost a seance. It's almost like we're creating a space to invite something beyond the both of us to come in and take this over and inform us in a way that either of us can't do alone. It's something in a sense like mystical that we're doing. It's that sense of the logos. Like we're almost inviting the word that's beyond both of us to come into this space and come together. And the issue that I've seen with some of the practices that have been that are trying to bring this circling back, and they're trying to bring this way to authentically relate back, is that in some of the boundaries that are being brought in, it's castrating the possibility for real dialogue to happen, because we're so concerned about the offense of the other person. Two extremes, right? We're either offending because I'm trying to beat you into the ground within the debate, or I'm so concerned about offending you that I have all these rules in place about what I can say and what I can't say, and how I can say it, swinging the other way, and it becomes extremely formulaic. And if it becomes too formulaic, we're killing the life of something that we're trying. In the sense, we want something to catch fire between us. We're setting up the kindling, like your concepts, my personality, your personality, our commitment to having this be something greater than both of
Yeah.
us. That's setting up the kindling, and the idea is as we talk,
Hmm.
hopefully it catches fire, and then the fire is not within our
Yeah.
control.
So this is interesting what you're saying, because it seems like when I hear you, it's like we may come together as two individuals, but it's not about us as individuals, but rather it's what is the we that is arising from that? What is that maybe third entity that is being created as we dance, as we communicate together? And it requires that willingness maybe to humble the personal self, to humble the individual self, but rather be open to what is it that we can create, what is that will be created once we come together from a place of openness and to just engage and to relate.
That was beautiful. That was beautifully said. Absolutely. Absolutely. And there's at least the understanding, because it'd be very, we can be in conversation right now and you say something that all of a sudden I feel a reaction in me, and there's an honesty to that.
Mhm.
It's like, wow, I'm reacting in this kind of way. There's something in me that wants to defend this. Ooh, what is that? Like even there's a possibility for some wisdom and being honest about that. Not like, well, here's the formula that I'm going to put on. So even though this is playing inside me, I understand the formula in order to not offend, in order to and I go right to the formula instead of being within that discomfort of like, oh, and that's what you said about, you said we, I'll use us. I mean, that's
Mm,
why the name that we've given to what we do is fluidUs,
yeah.
because it has fluidus obviously from like we're fluid, but also there's an us aspect,
Mm,
and there's
interesting. I didn't know
and
that.
and that I and that us play. So there's an us inside. There's
Yeah.
an I that organizes, but there's an I and an us inside me. So I'm not just an I. I'm also an other. So we talk, it's in our language, right? I connect with myself. Well, in a sense, there's an othering and an using of myself in order to have, in a sense, a relationship to that. So there's that there. And then there's also an I, not I, that happens between that. So there's an us here, but there's this other thing that, this other us that comes between, that takes on a life of its own, where, like you said, like there's something mystical. There's something like in that ineffable quality of something that happens that's more than either of us alone. Like we're more than the sum of our parts when we come together in this way. So it really is like this invoking
Mm,
of this other.
yeah. And as you say, one of the challenges that can arise is that our identity is wrapped up in our perspective. Our identity is wrapped up in what it is that we believe. And as soon as somebody challenges that, it isn't that they just challenge the idea, but rather it is that they challenge us. And so just the fracturing of that idea is like the fracturing of the self. And that is so incredibly confronting, I imagine. I mean, I've definitely been there myself. And what I'm asking myself is, what can be done in order for us to maybe soften that, for us to allow a conversation? And I guess when I say that, what is really required is for us to constantly reflect, for us to constantly question our own beliefs and actually open ourselves to the opposition.
Yes, absolutely. That there's so much there that what you said. We can do another 10 hours on what you just said,
But
but there's
before you
just so
say
much
anything, I want to definitely preface that I want to as well speak about fluidUs, and I want to speak as well about the work that you do. But let's dive into whatever you want to say.
this is the work that we do. Like we
Yeah,
can,
beautiful.
yeah. I
All
mean,
right.
we put a name on it
Yeah,
because we need almost like a beacon to hold
sure.
these ideas. But the wrestling that we're doing right
Mm,
now, that is the work that
all
we're
right.
doing, and the questions
Cool.
that you're asking are the questions that have birthed
Yeah.
what we're doing, and continue to shape it.
Yep.
Um, we have such an impoverished idea of what we are. And I think that impoverished small idea of what we are, being so misguided and confused, obviously leads to an over defense of this fragile little thing that's just a set of concepts that I'm trying to defend against other concepts that are trying to crush in on me. That's an impoverished idea of self. Even the idea of self as one thing, as one identity. Like it's an easy experiment. It's like, well, I know I believe in kindness, and I believe that you should always, you know, speak well to others and never raise your voice. And these are my beliefs to the core. And then we go outside, and then someone cuts us off, and we almost crash, and immediately we find ourselves for that one moment screaming, and sometimes we'll be like looking at ourselves. It's like, what the hell are you saying? This flies in the face of the virtues that I hold so dear. So what's if I'm just one thing, then what happened there? How am I holding these two paradoxical ways of being? If we broaden our idea of self and we open ourselves up to the possibility of what I am being much greater and much broader than what I've understood. And that's some of the work that we'll do within the longer workshops and within the trainings is again to challenge these ideas of like, well, who are you? Like that's a big question. And we kind of like, well, we answer quickly. It's not a quick answer. It's not an easy answer to do that. So if we can expand this idea of what self is and where we identify, because am I solely identifying with this one concretized, crystallized, static version of myself within the grasp of the ideas that I have right now, or can I broaden myself to also identify with the aspirational self inside me, like that self that's drawing me forward through time somehow? We all have that. We all like feelings of inadequacy in a sense get a bad rap. But I mean, if we felt completely adequate right now, what would be the purpose of moving forward at all if I'm completely content and adequate right now? It's a nice idea. The intention is right, but it's absolutely wrong. It's absolutely wrong. We get the most meaning and fulfillment physiologically when we're moving towards something that's meaningful to us, not when we attain it. When we attain it, it goes away in a sense. There's actually a depression when we attain something that we're going for that comes pretty quickly after the attainment. So moving forward towards something, like moving forward towards greater wisdom, towards greater connection. And there's a judge inside of us in a sense that's constantly comparing the I that I can be to the I that I am. And that space between what I know that I could be, that voice that's calling me forward, and who I am right now, that space, that tension between these two, we feel it as a judge. We feel it as something that's calling us forward. And we could answer that call two ways. Oh my God, poor little me, I'm inadequate, or taking up taking up the call, like answering that call to move towards whatever that is. The ground of being is expressed within this inner voice. So again, giving people a different perspective of like, you're not just these ideas. Like you said, if you think that you're the wisest right now than you'll ever possibly be, that's very confused, first of all, and that's also very wrong. That's also very wrong. Now, if you're saying, well, this is who I am right now, and who I am right now is a step on this journey of the possibilities of what I'll become, that has deep roots within our ancient sense of self, where that sense of ourselves of who we could be was actually more real. And this was a transition towards the possibilities of what I can be as I try to join together this person and bring this person and draw this person forward to the possibilities of the fullness of the experience of the closest possible relationship with the ground of being, with others, with self, with all of these things. So we can remove the definition that we have, the impoverished definition of ourselves, and inspire from experience, inspire us to a broader definition and move towards it, that may start to soften some of these things. And again, we'll bring it back, which is why the experiential is so important first. Instead of sitting someone down within dialogue, you and I, before we started speaking, even before I got here, you asked me, do you need some time before we start? Do you need some time before we start? And even before we started, you said, well, we'll sit and we'll breathe for a second. What are we doing there? What are we doing there? Part of what I'm doing, because part of the work for me is to try to take these things that are inherent in us and I'm trying to reverse engineer them and speak about them and write about them and give people some kind of propositional content because it's important to bridge these things. But part of what I'm doing is that I don't want that part of my personality to come up too much and defend itself too much to limit the possibility of something magical happening between us, to not be enriched by your connection to consciousness, by your shining out of something, to be able to feel that, to take that in, and to somehow be transformed from that. So I'm very aware of my capacity for self-deception. And it's not as if, oh, I'm aware so it won't happen. I'm aware, so within that awareness, I'm creating a certain ecology of practices, things that I do that, in a sense, hopefully prepare me to receive, prepare me to step outside of that impoverished framing and into the possibilities of being moved forward through time. So part of the ecology of practices that we're doing is to prepare people to be physically and emotionally resilient and have that inspirational, transformational moment of awe and wonder where this is, oh, okay, this is inspiration to move forward. I want to connect more to whatever it is that I experience there, because the impoverished understanding that I have of myself is limited to be able to grasp the fullness of what I just experienced. And now from that place and from the working through this, breath is the same way. We become more and more resilient. There's a baby Krishna story. I won't bore you with the whole details. But at the end of the story, baby Krishna's mother looks into baby Krishna's mouth, unknowing that he was a god. And when he opens his mouth, she is flooded with visions of the entire world, of who she is, of who she could be, of all the aspects of creation itself, the terrible beauty of the world. And she can't take it, and she starts to tremble. And Krishna taps her on the head and makes her forget. That happens to all of us. We can only stand so much, like, of those moments of ecstasy where it's like, if I look into the abyss another second, I may burn up. And that's the sense. So part of the work is the inspiration. Part of the work is allowing us to step beyond the current framing. And then part of the work also is to become more resilient so we can stand a little more. So can I look into the face of God, for lack of a better word, for a little longer? Can I look into my own eyes for one more second before I have to pull away? So that's the idea of the ecology of practices, of the fluid us, of the I not I, the other not other, of bringing myth forward again through time to make ritual and myth intellectually respectable and intellectually responsible, to connect us again to a sense of meaning and home.
For the last 5 minutes, I've just had this grin on my face, just feeling so much joy listening to you. And I feel like it just, everything that you said, I mean, you said so much, and it has summed up so beautifully everything that we've been speaking about over the last, a bit over an hour now. And yeah, just to reflect back, if I were to put some of what you said in my own words, what we're attempting to do, or what it seems like we're attempting to do, is to loosen up that part of us that is so wrapped up and identified that this is who we are in our personality. Right? When you spoke about us taking a moment to breathe, or when I asked you, do you need a moment? It's like that is seen as time or space for preparation for us to let go of that personality sense of self and open ourselves up to something, to the recognition that, yes, that is definitely an aspect of who we are, the personality self. But then at the same time, recognize that we can and be so much bigger, and we are so much bigger than just the personality self. And this ecology of practices that you have been naming is an access point for us to get there. And as you say, there is only so much we can take at a time. But at the same time, that journey of embarking on that is what I would say creates a sense of meaning for us. It creates a sense of joy for us to recognize that we can expand.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I know we're running a little short on time, but so much, I'll throw that right back at you, so much in what you just said. Um, in the old Greek, there's different forms of love. We have, again, our language is very limited when we speak about love as one thing. So the agapic sense of love is this love of creation, in a sense that through the act of loving this, we do that with babies all the time. They're nothing. They're like little, like almost useless, like mounds of flesh. They can't do much, but we almost love them into personhood. We love them, we teach them, they imitate us. They imitate us looking at them, and somehow from this agapic love, from loving this thing that's really not worthy of the love, it's not doing anything. Normally, oh, I love this. Well, why do you love them? Oh, because they're so kind, because they're honest. Well, why do you love the baby? I don't, it's not doing anything. It's, I'm loving in spite of it. I'm loving it forward into personhood, in a sense. So in these conversations that we're having together, if we do it from a place that we're talking about, in a sense, we're loving ourselves beyond personality and into some kind of richer personhood. So we're loving ourselves into persons by the way that we work together. And there's a sense that there's a nowness to us. But the nowness, even though it's complete in a sense now, it's also seed-like. It's also a step to something. So in a sense, we're all walking around like these potent seeds with possibilities beyond our current reckoning, because we don't even have the perspective yet to understand what the tree will look like the acorn. I wonder if the acorn has any idea of what the tree is. And you look at an acorn, it looks nothing like a tree. Unless you had some kind of experience, you'd be like, these are not even the same things. How could this come from this? So in a sense, we're acorns walking around without access to even the inspiration of the tree yet. So this thing that we're doing together is trying to draw out something greater from within us. And this call beyond, like you said, not away from the personality, but a call trans personality, in a sense, like beyond, like a bridge beyond the personality. Like keep the personality, let it come out and play, but understand that that's one aspect, that that's not the fullness of what we are. So this is meaningful. This is the richness. There's an old idea. Have you ever thought about heaven?
Quite a bit, for sure.
Quite a bit. I think most of us have, and I think most of us haven't taken the idea far enough. Because it sounds nice, right? Like the idea of heaven as a place you get to do everything that you want. Bliss on tap. Honey, nectar. Coming out of everywhere. For how long? For how long would that be? For how long? How long before that's a hell? Because let's say, well, what would you do at that time? Well, I'd do everything pleasurable. It's like, okay, well, first million years, you do everything pleasurable. Awesome. What next? Well, I'll learn everything. I really wanted to learn how to do this. Okay. Play golf. Well, okay. You spend the next million years becoming, hole in one on every shot. Okay, done that. What happens another 2 trillion years? What is it that would be meaningful to you after you've been in heaven with no needs, no wants, no mortality, 3 trillion years of that? What would happen? What would we do? And for most people, that would become, it's also the idea of some of the Asian traditions and their version of hell, where it keeps spinning in the same thing. It's like, well, 3 trillion, 4 trillion years. It's like, oh my God. But the one thing that I can imagine in my limited imagination, the one thing that I can imagine that would continue to be meaningful would be that continuous attempt to move towards relationship with the ground of being and more transcendence, because this transcendence idea, like you said, it's meaningful and it's infinite. So that aspect of ourselves that's animal and body and in matter and that transcendence. We're moving like deeper
Mm.
embodiment and deeper transcendence all at the same
Mm.
time. So in a sense, we are the paradox.
Mm.
We are the paradox. And even some of the symbols that we didn't realize what they were talking about necessarily. And maybe this has something like the cross. Like there's the horizontal and the vertical from within the cross. There's that sense of we are the creatures that are somehow the expression of the finite and the infinite. And we're trying to come to terms with that. We're trying to figure out what this is. So moving towards that is meaningful.
Mm. Thank you. Can we speak a bit more about the finite, this topic of embodiment, and maybe link it up a little bit to the work that you do in form of movement and how you access movement in order to perhaps touch the infinite, to touch that place of magic and wonder?
It's a microcosm in a sense. I mean, to give, in a sense, I've struggled with, again, like I said, I reverse engineer a lot. And we can talk the next time that we get together, we'll talk more about my journey. But a lot of it was the experience first.
Mm.
And then trying to reverse engineer what the experience was and
Mm.
why the experience was and what exactly was happening and what I was tapping into and how does this connect to the physical experience. But we're constantly trying to look out there uh, for something when the microcosm of everything that we've talked about is within us. So those relationships, the finite and the infinite, the, in a sense, infinite mind between the finite body, the the I that is my personality in relation to the mysterious I that has its own way of being underneath. Like we have no problem talking about I in a certain sense, but how about the fifth cell, half a millimeter deep in your third rib on your left side? Is that you also? Is that I also? And if it's not I, then who is it? And where do I become I? And when am I not I? Like, where did this emergent property of I come from? Like, what is all this life that's living and dying? One of the things that I wrote recently that I haven't put it out there yet, but is I am walking death.
Mm.
I am walking
Just
death.
explain that.
Every every breath that I take, there's a million beings inside me that die.
Mm.
Like death isn't something that's waiting for me sometime in the future. It's I am walking death.
Mm.
Things are dying and being reborn in me every moment. And I mean millions on scales that would be unimaginable. And that's me walking. It's not like, why would I fear death? I am walking death. I've been dying since the moment that I came into existence within this form. So even you can see how we can even play from within the body, from within our capacity to feel sensuously, to have, like we're talking now and you're doing such a good job with this, like we're kind of savoring each other's words and we're savoring, like we can't get away from the embodiment language. It's like you were talking a little while ago and the movement teacher in me was just kind of watching you like do this, and I'm like, what the hell does this have to do with the concepts that you're coming in there? But you're rolling ideas through your fingers. We're trying to grasp concepts. So our cognition is intimately based in our bodies and in our
Mm.
physical, even the ways that we talk about thinking. It's so intimate with being embodied. So we can go even deeper within that and turn this ability for cognition
Mm.
inwards. So that sense of wonder doesn't necessarily need to be out there, but that confrontation with something divine and mysterious that's I and also not I can be felt directly from within our own bodies. So in that, teaching people how to feel and how to sense, it's again how to savor ideas, how to savor our experience of being within a body. So that's part. And it's not that labels stick to us sometimes, and sometimes they feel a little small for what we're doing, or maybe not small. I don't want to make it hierarchical in that way, but they feel limiting in that sense. And within a movement practice, like people will come to me because They want to learn how to do handstands, and yes, within the methods that we've developed, since it starts from within the intelligence of the body and in this inner conversation, it almost magically allows us to do things with our bodies in a much quicker way and more resilient, and people get drawn to that. I'm like, okay, but really, it's like, oh, it's okay, but really, it's what I'm attempting is the jump from this into this, from attempting to, okay, cool, like you can do the difficult things because that's going to put you in a conversation. You can do something that feels special because that's going to open the possibilities for you to see something other than that. The body work that I do also, people come to me because their knee hurts, or their organs are doing something, but again, it's that tension. It's like, okay, like I'll help you with the physical stuff, but really what I'm hoping for in some sense, or hoping is not the right word, the gift that I hope that you receive from this, which is going to be maybe more powerful than this, is the experience of feeling and sensing yourself as something deeper than you can imagine. So again, the movement in both directions, like the deep within the body as a movement into the transcendent at the same time.
And you do absolutely an incredible job of that. I can definitely vouch that from my own experience. And yeah, it felt important to speak about that because I recognize as well, this is really one of the understandings that you come from, that this magic, this wonder, sometimes there can be this perception that it's outside of myself and I have to grasp for it and I don't have it yet. And it seems that, there's so many, we spoke about an ecology of practices, and the work that you as well do, it seems to point to the fact, actually, that magic is always there. But maybe with what we're carrying or what is present for us, we just don't have access to it. And so where can we perhaps have an experience of letting go what it is that we're holding on to, or softening whatever tension that is here, so we can actually connect to that innate wisdom or that innate magic that is always there.
Absolutely. It's the lenses, right? It's the same lenses that we were talking about, the inability to see or sense or even look in a certain direction. There's a patience required there, but if you don't think that anything is going to happen, why would you put in the patience sometimes to do it? Proust said that the real voyage of discovery consists not in finding new landscapes, but into having new eyes.
I was thinking of the quote today.
Beautiful. See, something happens between us. That's great.
Crazy.
But in a sense, that's what we're doing. We're helping people rediscover their new eyes. It's because the landscapes have been magical the whole time. What's going on in their bodies, the chemical things that you're doing right now, your ability right now to take light, move it through rods and cones, reflect it on your optical nerve, and somehow turn electrical signals into imagination, have those imaginations go into concepts. I mean, there can be no doubt that what you're doing right now is infinite and beyond our capacity to even describe. And that's who you are sitting there at this moment. But again, that's still conceptual. That's still an abstract idea. So it's one of the reasons that movement is such a big and primary part of what we do, because I don't necessarily need to go through as much story. If I tell someone, well, put your fingers here and do this. It's not like, well, let's discuss the possibility of the self being more than one thing. It's like, well, no, but my upbringing said this, and I have ideas, and like that can lead to a lot of resistance. If we go into movement first, the way that we teach movement, I'm not telling people exactly what to do and what to feel in a sense. I'm asking them, do this, and then look for this feeling in you. Like, what do you notice? So again, it's this, we'll give you the playground in a sense, but the calling, the invitation is always to start to experience these things inside. And that is where the magic lies. I get way too much credit in a sense for some things. I deserve some credit for some things, but for like the incredible trust built over a long time. If I can get someone to feel and turn inside, it's going to take care of itself in a way. And then what we're trying to do is we're trying to bring people up into this inspiration so we can sit in community and dialogue and bring these ideas up. Um, and in order to do that, this first part of having the move of, what happens when you do this? If you put your arm here, what happens if when you go here and you breathe, you lift this and you do this and you do this and now turn inwards? What did that feel like? What did you notice? Like, so it's hands off at that point. I'm giving an invitation to do something, turning you in and leaving you within. There's a word that I'm looking for. I'm leaving you to the theater of your own experience in a sense. I'm leaving you to face and confront the reality of what you are. And that does the softening in a sense, where it's like, and it's not as if like the first time that you do it, you get the whole big taste. There's one of the reasons that I say, yogis don't always like this part, but that advanced postures are for beginners. Because at the beginning, if you don't know any better, you need something really big in order to feel something. You need to put your arm here, take your leg behind your head, bend over backwards. Like, it needs to be so epic and full. It's like you need to have like so much spice in the food because you don't know how to taste yet.
Right.
Your tongue's basically been numb. It has You're not a connoisseur yet. Like, you don't understand how to savor the subtle. So we need to put like cayenne peppers and all sorts of things. So we need these big movements. But as you understand and you realize that there's so much to savor in the subtle, your access point into that deeper world, I just got goosebumps just from doing that. But it's from this repetition, it's from this going into this world that we start to understand that there's almost a superpower that we have, that we can sense the inner world with, and that starts to open up exponentially after a while. Where one of the things that I aim at doing within movement is to become irrelevant in a sense as a teacher. Not irrelevant within the community, like relevant within the community, but irrelevant as the sightseeing guide that has to take you up the same path of the mountain. Because eventually you want to be able to be like, well, no, you've taken me up enough. I need to go up there and go off the path and spend some more time in the mountain on my own. And then when you come back, we can discuss, what was your experience of the mountain? What was yours? Oh, I'd never been down that path. Like, what does that mean? Then we can discuss this together.
Yeah, and it sounds like this is really a journey about actually empowering the other person, for them to really experience their own innate wisdom versus projecting the wisdom to be on you and constantly looking to you for the answers.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
absolutely. And that's the thing. And at the beginning, it's tricky because of the self-deception. But the idea is to empower someone with an ecology of practices and a way to wrestle. I mean, that was, Plato. I mean, this concept has been within Western society for so long. The word Plato wasn't a name. Plato was a nickname. The word Plato was a nickname. It meant broad shoulders because Plato was a wrestler.
All right, I didn't know that.
Yeah, so Plato was a wrestler. So this idea of wrestling with something, it's not like just, raise your hand and answer quickly from what you've memorized. It's like, take it in you. Take it in you, chew on it, let it mess you up a little bit, let it challenge you, let it annoy you, let yourself not understand it. What does it feel like? Like chew on it. What happens now? Then bring it to the community, put it out there, see what else happens when you bring it there. Let something else be sparked from the logos that's happening within the community, and let that inform you. Again, take that on, wrestle with that. And that kind of intimacy, we can take this back to the embodiment part, like taking rough play and wrestling away from us, where we can only touch softly. It's like, no, like to feel your boundaries and your strength, to have like even these ritualistic like forms of pushing physically and having something push back, so we understand our boundaries and our limits, and to understand how to wrestle not just with each other but with ideas, with concepts, with life. It's an intimate thing.
What I've really loved about this conversation is this constant coming back to this tonos, this tension, right? And I feel like, just having listened to you, I feel like there's a new reframe around my experience around having this tension, because I experience this tension all the time. every single day. And then it can be so quickly when I don't question that I judge that. And then there's this perception that there's something wrong, and then something needs to be fixed, versus where can that be in something beautiful, actually, and an innate experience that is actually there to guide me, to support me. I loved as well when you spoke about that as well in the preface around inadequacy, and that the inadequacy is actually, or that perception of inadequacy is actually the thing that is supporting us in, embarking on the journey, right? That's such a beautiful reframe, because how many of us, have that experience? I don't feel good enough, right? And where can that actually be something beautiful?
Absolutely. And that, a lot of the language that we'll use, and I'm doing two things. I'm trying to take back the language in a sense, to reframe some of those concepts and bring them, and even being in some of the movement stuff, like changing some of the language because of the connotations that we have, to allow a different framing around these very human things that all of a sudden, even emotions, being like, oh no, this is a bad emotion, this is a good emotion. So we're walking around feeling inadequate, thinking that that's a problem, instead of, again, like more like fertilizer for the soil of what we are. Like this is something um, to be uplifted, to make a relationship with, to use it as a beacon, a candle in the night, that we can aim at. This isn't a wrong thing.
Yeah, and it really, for me, creates a new story around, we're not broken, we don't need to be fixed, we're whole, and there's something beautiful about us that we can connect to.
Yeah. We're being and we're becoming all at once, and even that's attention, right? Even we can even play like, because there's a musicality to this, like to steal from another author, and I can't remember the name of the author right now, but the musicality of existence, like we're fully being, but we're also becoming, like we're complete and we're not complete at the same time. But again, how to hold these, how to be able to hold paradoxes, and again, because a lot of these things exist outside, the truth of these things exists outside of the purely propositional. So we need something beneath. We need to drop down beneath the paradox of the propositional. Beneath. That's what irony, in a sense, is trying to do. It's trying to play with these two things that don't make sense together, and like to help drop us down beneath them.
Yeah, and we can recognize, as we hold these paradoxes, that we can as well contain multitudes.
Yes.
In many ways.
Absolutely, man.
Well, beautiful, brother. I feel like this is a really good time as well to start slowly wind down the conversation. I would like to, before I ask you, where our listeners can find you, I would like to ask you, what is one practice, perhaps, or one thing that our listeners can do today to start embarking on this journey of connecting back to a state of wonder, to connecting back to tap into a transcendental experience? What is one thing that our listeners can do today?
The two that came up for me, one is breath. One is breath. To savor the breath, and it's and again, it's, I'm going to say the same thing with playing with tension and movement in the body, but and again, an attempt to savor it. Like, how much can you taste of that? To move, you can either tense your body completely and try to move from a completely tense state to where you can barely move and slowly start to soften and continue to savor, something like that. Like open the conversation, open the conversation with the deeper aspects of yourself, because there is a you that's not you, another that's not other, that lives beneath your concepts of who you are, and it's time to open that conversation.
Yeah, I can definitely speak into that. Even in this conversation today, I noticed those moments in myself where I was holding on to tension, where I was putting myself in this role of, oh, I'm the host and I need to really listen and I need to pay attention.
How does that look? It looks
really good questions. Exactly, right? And then it was like those moments where, Alex, just take a deep breath.
Right.
And just stay here, stay present.
That's it.
Beautiful.
That's it. Yeah.
Where can our listeners find us, Carlos? Find you.
They could find us, yeah.
fluidUs.
Yeah, exactly. I'm an us and I'm an other and I'm a me and I'm an I and all at once. Uh, the easiest place to find us would be fluidus Academy on Instagram or fluidusacademy.com as the website. They could also, for more inspirational things and for um, some of these concepts in bite-sized ways that we can take on, again, not just propositionally, but ideas to let them be inside and to chew on them for a while. My Instagram, Carlos Dow Movement, would be another place to go. And we're in the process right now of creating another platform where we can bring all of these things together within movement, breath, myth, ritual, dialogue, and in community. So that's coming soon. But I mean, um, any of those things would be a good place to start. It's like exploring a garden. There's wherever you get dropped in, that's the beginning.
Yep. Beautiful. Well, I'll make sure to just put up the links down in the show notes. And yeah, I just want to leave it by just thanking you, acknowledging you, Carlos. I really appreciated this conversation. In many ways, it went on its own journey, right? And I kind of like that. You know, I asked you some questions at the beginning, wanting to hear about your own personal journey. And then at the end, our journey went somewhere else. Yeah. And I love that.
Beautiful. Yeah. And thank you for having that space. And because that's important too. Again, that setting up the kindling. That setting up the kindling, like you and I both had, which is funny. I'm listening to you, and it's like, well, what is the face of I am listening? Do my eyes look like I'm listening right now? Like, what do I do with my hands? This overwhelming self-consciousness of personality can come up. But we set up the kindling, and there's again like that inspiration, that invitation to surrender to something that's greater. And it's not like we put our personalities away, but we do our best to, when something comes up that's going to limit and take over, to not let that happen. It's a beautiful practice, and I enjoyed it, and looking forward to doing this again with you.
Absolutely.
At some point.
I would absolutely love that.
We can go into the history and
for sure.
Those things. Yeah.
I would absolutely love that.
Thank you.
Well, to our listeners, I want to just say thank you for listening, and until next time, much love.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to this episode. Your time and attention is truly appreciated. If you enjoyed the show, make sure to subscribe to stay tuned for my upcoming episodes. And in case you know somebody who would find this episode helpful, I encourage you to pay it forward. Finally, if you've personally been receiving value from the show, one way you're able to support this podcast is by leaving a 5-star rating and a written review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. Not only does this help more people find the show, but it also supports me in bringing more incredible guests on for the future. I'm your host, Alex Lehman, and until next time, signing off.